Mike Brown situation really just underscores some of the tensions and some of the realities that we've been facing for years, not just in Ferguson, not just in Florence, but in the St. Louis region. Prior to coming to the AACP, I worked at the ACLU in 2005 to 2012. And the numbers and kinds of complaints that we've received relative to abused police authority were numerous and consistent. And it impacted me particularly because I am a former police officer. I was a police officer in St. Louis City for 5 years. I have been shot at enforcing the laws of this state. But the reality on the ground is this. Race has impacted every part of American life since the nation's inception. It is not always comfortable to talk about the way that I try to make it comfortable for people to talk about in rooms like this, a diverse group, in a country like ours, where there are several nationalities and races represented, is this. It is not an indictment of any of the white educators in this room if I say, for example, that during the so-called war on drugs, white kids sold drugs twice as often as black kids did, bought drugs twice as often as black kids did, but black kids were arrested at exponentially higher rates than white kids on drug-related offenses. That's not an indictment of any of you. It is a reality. The issue becomes, will we take responsibility for conditions that already existed? In other words, that system and the things that impacted relative to race pre-exist all of us in this room. We were born into this reality. Trust me, it was like this when we got here. What are we going to do about it? And the first step is to acknowledge the reality on the ground. I have my opinions about Mike Brown's case, and I understand it as a representative of the national NAACP, which I work for the national. I work with all the branches locally, but I'm actually an employee of the national NAACP. I have to say that we need to let all the facts come in, and we do. I think there are substantial facts already in. But I have to say that it reflects a reality that I've known for years, which is the reason I left law enforcement was because A, I was profoundly disillusioned with the criminal justice system in the United States and the inequities that were legislated into it, the targeted enforcement that it features. And specifically, I became disillusioned with the conduct of some of my colleagues, and I won't go through all the stories that I could tell you about what I saw when I was on the department to bring you to the space that I'm in personally, but trust me, I've seen some abused authority. And I think your role in terms of the school itself being a stabilizing factor in our communities and in our homes. Schools are more than just schools, we know that. They're hubs in communities, and your role in that when you extend yourself out into the homes of the families that you go into is to understand the reality on the ground. And having said that, let me say this. There is another challenge for African American families and community members to face, and it's been amplified, I think, in this discussion of Mike Brown and Reverend Blackman, you heard it. But what about the things that we do in our own community? Where is the protest, for example, for those kids who've been gunned down by other blacks? That's a legitimate question. It's a legitimate question. I can't ignore it. I can't fail to acknowledge the reality is we do have issues to work through in our community, but they are, many would argue, separate issues with similar ends. One involves people who are entrusted to act responsibly and ethically and morally, who we have vested with the authority to act, who have ostensibly been trained to make decisions in certain situations, and who sign on for that, like I did when I was a police officer. And the other involves, as I would argue, young people whose minds and hearts have been shaped largely in the circumstances that they've come up in. Is that to exempt anyone in our community from responsibility? No. Trust me, the black community understands accountability and responsibility. We were raised on it. You do wrong, you know, there's a consequence. We understand, we get that. But with Mike Brown's situation, what you're going to see is, I think, an even more intensified distrust of authority, particularly police authority, and maybe as a knee-jerk reaction, some increased distrust for those who appear to be unconditional advocates of police authority, who never question the actions of the police, who always argue for support of any decision that the department makes, who always argue the integrity of law enforcement, completely ignoring a history that is riddled with contradictions and situations that contradict that. So I think when you all prepare to go into homes now, the situation still exists. Time is not going to diminish the memories of what happened in Ferguson. And this is not just a local conversation, this is a national conversation. Believe me, I've been on many calls for Blackman, I'm sure you have too. But I've been on national calls. I mean, I was on the phone with White House staff 4 times in the week following Mike Brown's death, because across the country, this is the subject, and it's a particular situation, but it speaks to, I think, the opportunity that we have if we are courageous enough, sincere enough to acknowledge that race has always impacted every part of what we do here. I mean, just to bring it home for you, let's look at our schools. And I trust me, I don't want you to be uncomfortable, I just want you to be with me. Look at our schools. When my daughter went to Commons Lane Elementary, when they started there, that school population, student population, was 95% African American, 90% at least. I think there were 2 African American educators in that school. Now, is that to say that white educators can't educate black kids? No. But it is to say that I think that there is something structurally problematic and concerning for me as a parent in this community when I send my kids to schools and I look at all of the administration and all the staff and just about all the schools. And I don't have to stop at Ferguson, of course. I can go to Hazelwood, I can go to almost any district in the county, in North County particularly, and see the same thing. And everybody is comfortable with that. And everybody is okay with that, because we're going to do a good job, and we don't see that as, you know, we don't see race, we're going to do a good job, so we don't have a problem with it because we know what we bring to the table. But there is underneath that, when you have a Mike Brown situation that kicks off, a magnification of everything that we see in front of us that points to inequity, that points to us being treated differently. And I don't want to take too much time because I don't know how much time I have, because I could talk for a while, but when I say the kinds of things that point to the kinds of inequities that you can address, A, by acknowledging that they exist, B, by doing the meaningful work to bring some change in those arenas. Look at the situation in Ferguson, where you had people who protested, who came out, because what you didn't get to see is that whole lineage of history from generation to generation, the daily abuses that don't necessarily rise to the level of someone being gunned down in the street, but someone maybe being physically assaulted wrongfully, someone being maybe wrongfully arrested, someone being harassed without reason. And ultimately, you see Mike Brown laying in the street, and my good colleague, Dan Isom, former chief of police, St. Louis City, now the state's highest law enforcement official on the governor's cabinet, has said in words, there is no way that you ever would leave a young man like that lying in the street face down for 4 hours with his mother standing by. There's no cause for it. You can complete your initial investigation well short of a 4-hour time span. Well short of that. Do you know how that looks to people when you see, I want to act it out? You've seen the picture, you saw the live shot, laying in the street like a dog. It raised anger naturally. That is a human response to that. It raised defiance naturally. That's a human response to that. It raised sorrow and pain. They come out to protest and you saw the response. You saw the response. Now, contrast that with the rancher, Mr. Bundy, down in Nevada. Anybody, but just by show of hands, anybody heard of Mr. Bundy in Nevada? The rancher who's been grazing his cattle on federal lands for several years in direct violation of the law. Breaking the law in broad daylight, and then tell the law enforcement officials that, by the way, you ain't gonna do nothing about it. I'm gonna keep doing what I'm doing. And if you come down here, I got something for you. And the law enforcement people come and you have citizens with assault rifles on tripods like the one you see right there with that camera on it, weapons trained on law enforcement saying, we told you, this is our stuff, don't mess with it. By the dozens, and announced that they would do it. Law enforcement shows up. Can you imagine, just for a minute, if those young people in Ferguson, and I heard the reports of shots fired, I don't know, I haven't seen anything verified, I haven't seen anybody arrested and found in possession of a firearm. But can you imagine had those law enforcement people arrived and seen young people with assault rifles on tripods like that and weapons aimed like this and saying, hey, don't take another. Can you imagine the scene? The bloody scene? We get it. We're different. The system treats people differently. What you can do collectively, I think, is be a part of the solution to that larger problem, even outside the context of your role as educators, your role as citizens. We can become agents of change who acknowledge that we should all be equally valued in every process that we have, especially in the educational process, which plays such a critical role in the lives of everyone going forward. We know how important it is. Make sure that we're doing everything we can to show that this is a community that is about equality, that is about justice, that is about fairness, that's about honestly addressing problems and not always reshaping the narrative to fit the story we would like to have told. I'll finish up with this because I feel like I need to pass the mic. I'm talking too long. And I know a lot of people in law enforcement from the work I did as a police officer and the work I did afterwards with the ACLU and now the NAACP. Here in the news just yesterday, you saw St. Louis County Police Academy, and I know Chief Belmar and several other administrators for that department personally. But here you see they're now offering a course on how to win the media after a police-involved shooting. How to shape the narrative. That's what we want to take away from this, is how do we tell our story about how this went down. Better, to me, as a former officer, how do you treat the people that you serve fairly? How do you value the lives of people in the communities you serve equally? How do you make sure that equal treatment under the law is the reality in our country and not just the narrative or its advertisement? We've never had it. I would argue, I would debate anybody in this room right now, if you want to, you have never had it. You can get there, but it takes our collective commitment. So, again, you know, I hope, it's just where I am, and it's hard for me not to be where I am. You all, from my personal experience, have done a great job. Parents as teachers, it's a good program. I argued up at the legislature, that was one of my things that I pushed, we do not take money from this program. We need to continue, and I believe that even in this moment, I know that you all are a high value resource to everything that's going on in our schools, and I would argue with anybody about that. But I think we have a long way to go, and it's not just our community or us in this room that's at a turning point. I think the nation is at a turning point. the demographics really reflect that. I think you're going to be looking at a country in about 30 years where really there is much less tolerance for this inequity that we've lived with for so many generations.
You should be on.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I want to begin by saying thank you, echoing what Reddick has said. Thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for being there. Thank you for standing in the gap. Thank you for the work that you do. This morning, I began my day at 7 at a Kiwanis Club breakfast, where ironically I was called to pray for educators and the school system and the support system around educators. The keynote for that breakfast this morning was Chris Nicastro. I left there at 9 and went to a private meeting with Chief Belmar and Chief Johnson and a few collective community leaders to talk about, once again, what is happening in Ferguson, but I would argue what is happening in St. Louis. While in that meeting, I received a call from Sierra, whom I'd asked to come here today because someone burned the memorial for Mike Brown today. And so the community is now once again in an uproar. On the way here, I received a call from Captain Johnson, who is distraught because for the very first time since he took over the case, he was greeted with a large amount of aggression when he left the meeting we were in to respond to what is happening in Canfield right now. So as I sit in this room with you who have come here to hear about what's happening, maybe some of you have been involved in different ways, and for that, thank you. I am very cognizant that St. Louis will forever be changed by this moment. And as I was listening to Reddick and watching your faces and began to look around this room, which is beautiful, I was taken by the pictures of the babies that you have on the wall. I invite you to turn around and look at them. What do you see? That's a real question.
Innocence.
Our next generation.
You would like?
The next generation, innocence, pure life, anything else? A future. Potential. I see that as well. And then I began to think about, especially as a pastor, the number of black men that I talk to who at some point look just like those, especially these two on the end, with all of that hope and potential in their eyes. And I hear black males say, I probably won't live to be 25. I probably won't live to be 30. Just think about that. I heard Mike Brown's mother say, do you know how hard it was to get him out of high school? And she wasn't just talking about Mike Brown. She was talking about a system that does not help her in her pursuit of equity in education for her child. So this morning during my prayer, the person who prayed before me had spoken about, they prayed about first responders, police, firemen, I think that's the only two, right?
EMS.
EMS. I added a fourth this morning. Because I believe that educators are first responders. No, I'm serious about that.
I've never heard of
Nicastro liked it. She said she was going to take it. I believe that the school system is a first responder. That there are many times when you see the trauma and the crisis that are happening in families and happening in neighborhoods before anybody else gets called. That you have children who are coming in who are dealing with the type of issues, the type of targeting, the type of oppression that we're talking about. They come to you guys before anybody else gets involved. And that's an awesome responsibility. So what has happened in Canfield has brought to light issues that are long-standing in St. Louis and are long-standing in this nation. And the reality is, I'm here as a pastor and I'm here because I care about St. Louis, but I would be less than honest not to tell you I am here because I raised 2 black boys that have the same hope as those little boys in that picture. And now they're 23 and they're 24. And one wears locks all the way down his back. And the other wears a close-cut, clean-shaven haircut. And every day of their lives, they have to think about the fact that they're black. Every day. When they get in a car, they have to be prepared to be stopped. When my boys go out at night, I have to stay up worrying, wondering, will they come home? That's the reality. It's not your fault. It's not my fault. It's not their fault. It is a system of which we are all victims. It's the images that you may see in media, the stories that we've been told when the hunter gets to write the history, that have created for us a society where some are the other. And there are lots of others. But right now, race is the one that we're dealing with. So I'm grateful that you all are there. I'm grateful to know that when I'm out in Canfield and all of the aggression was at its height, and the notice comes that Ferguson Florissant School District is not going to open for the safety of the children, I was excited about that. Because I didn't think that these children in Canfield that I was seeing should be worried about trying to get to school when there's cinder blocks blocking them into their neighborhoods. Until I found out that they don't go to Ferguson Florissant. Let's just keep it real. They go to Riverview, which did not close for a whole week, by the way. So who was the protection for? Just something to think about. Then I had mothers begin to ask me, why don't our kids go to Ferguson Florissant? Because Riverview is unaccredited. Wow. Just wow. On the heels of some of the most distasteful and disgraceful debates about education in St. Louis, in my opinion. On the heels of school districts being unaccredited and children being told they're not wanted in other places. Black and brown children. On the formation of a new school district that's really the old school district that just closed and reopened so that they wouldn't be unaccredited, so that all those black and brown children who weren't wanted other places would have to come back there. Let's just be real about it. All of that feeds into the reaction to Mike Brown. And I would argue that this system that has caused us to see people that we don't know and don't understand and don't interact with on a personal basis as the other, I would suggest to you that that otherness also caused the death of Mike Brown. I would suggest that to you. That it wasn't possible for him to simply be a child who walked in the middle of the street. That his blackness defined him as something else. So what does that have to do with you guys? I implore you to not just get to know about the children that you serve, but get to know them and their families. And I'm sure because I know who leads this, that that's the ethos of what you do. I sat in a room today where the police department touted its new diversity program. I'm not a big fan of diversity programs. I'm a big fan of relationship building. Because knowing about something and knowing someone is two different things. So when I see those pictures, my prayer is that all of those children, all 8 of them, have the ability to grow up and live up to their best selves. That all 8 of them get the opportunity to be judged by their character and not the color of their skin. That all 8 of them have people in their lives like you for whom great potential is seen. And I'm hopeful that parents as teachers will be a part of the solution in this area where I know that you're already working, but that you can be even a greater visible force so that the children begin to have some normalcy back in their lives and that they get to be children. I have parents calling me because their children are responding. I met a mother who has a 7-year-old child, and she met with me crying. She said her child was in the front yard playing because Canfield is somebody's neighborhood. Doesn't look like that, but it's somebody's neighborhood. He was in the front yard playing, and a police car drove by. And her 7-year-old son ran up on the porch, dropped to his knees, and put his hands up. He's 7. You have young kids who are asking their parents, who should I call if we need help? Who do I call if you get sick, mommy? Who do I call if you get sick, daddy? And that's not because there aren't some very, very good policemen. There are. I choose to believe there are more of those than not. but the images, the messages that people are receiving are something different than that. I've thought a lot about this question, and then I'm going to give the mic to Sierra because I wanted to bring her, because if you have questions about what can be helpful in Ferguson, I think you need to hear it from someone who lives in Ferguson. I've been asked a lot what made Mike Brown different. Because clearly, he's not the first black male to be killed. He's not the first black male to be shot, whether that's by the police or whether that's by someone else. And this is a side note, I do want to say this though. There's been a lot of talk about black on black crime, and I agree with Reddick that we have to address that. However, statistically, there is minimal difference between the number of black people who kill black people and the number of white people who kill white people. One is 84% and the other is 86%. Statistically, there is very little difference there. But we don't talk about white on white crime because racism does not criminalize white people. So when there's a mass shooting at a school, nobody says that's white on white crime. Anybody disagree with that? The whole notion of black on black crime is a racially motivated phrase that criminalizes black youth. Dead is dead. And people tend to kill those whom they live around. So you have statistically very little difference. Look it up yourself. Don't take my word for it. There's statistically very little difference between the number of white people who kill white people and the number of black people who kill black people. But you know what's off the charts? The number of white people who kill black people. That is not reciprocated the other way. Whether that's vigilante, whether it's police, we just got to tell the truth about it. So what made Michael Brown different? I don't think it was the killing. I think that as a society, we've become desensitized to death. Very rarely can you go a week if you look at the news at all and not see some little snapshot of somebody's baby with a school picture or a graduation picture or a thug picture, whatever they choose to put up there, with a little caption, police altercation, domestic violence, suicide, whatever the cause of death. It'll be a little blurb, and then we're on to what Jennifer Lopez and Beyonce are doing. We've become very desensitized to the number of deaths in our society. I don't think it was the killing of Michael Brown. I think if Michael Brown had been shot at Canfield and just that little blurb had gone on, we would have gone on business as usual. But what made Michael Brown different is that we now live in a technological age where people came out of their homes with cell phones and they videotaped not the shooting of Michael Brown, but the laying of a human being in the middle of the street with blood saturating the pavement. And they let the tape roll for 4.5 hours. I have friends who have hit dogs and gotten out of the street and taken the dog out of the middle of the street and at least put it in the grass. I know people who have hit deer at night and get out of their car and make sure that the deer is not left in the middle of the street. For 4.5 hours, somebody's baby laid in the middle of the street, face down, with blood saturating the pavement, with not even the courtesy of a sheet over his body. I am also a registered nurse. I did critical care nursing on the floors before I left the hospital. Occasionally, we had patients who didn't make it. And it was my responsibility to go into that room if it was my patient, or if I was charged that day, And this was, I'm dating myself, it was back before we had nurse aides. We did everything. I had to bathe that body, comb the body's hair, make sure all tubes were removed, place bandages so there was no leakage if that was the case, change the sheets in the bed, make the body of the deceased as presentable as possible, and then allow the family to come back in and say their final goodbye. This is the courtesy that I was trained to give. So as a mother, when I think about another mother being outside some yellow tape for 4.5 hours with her child laying in his own blood, not knowing whether he is dead or not, because there was no coroner on the scene, I get enraged. And when I watch video of police officers walking around that body with no respect, no acknowledgement that the loss of life is before them, I become enraged. And if that was not insult enough, when they were done, there was no ambulance call, but his mother watched his body be picked up out of the street and put in the back of an SUV. Now maybe that's common practice. I don't know.
It's not.
But it speaks to a larger issue in St. Louis, in America. I believe the blood did it. I believe that there is nobody, no matter what race, who could watch that and not be moved. Regardless of what you think about the killing, regardless of what you think about the police officers' actions, or what you think about Mike Brown's actions, in that moment, we saw the value of a black life in America. And that's what drives me. That every life must matter. That's where I am. And I will be here until every life matters. No mother, no father, no children should ever have to see that. Ever. No matter what the case. And now you have the job of going in and serving children and families where many of those children saw just that. So thank you.
I don't know how I'm supposed to go behind that. Good afternoon, everyone. Got me tearing up for the first time since everything happened. My name is Sierra Smith. I have been a Ferguson resident for 14 years now. I've lived in Canfield for 7. And again, I do commend you all for the work that you do, because I was in Ferguson, Florissant School District all of my life. I moved out of Kinloch. Thankful that I moved into Ferguson because I could still continue to go to school with my friends. So I'm definitely commending you all for that. And I received parents as teacher services when I was in McClure High School at the age of 16 when I got pregnant with my first child. And I'm hoping she's not in the room because I don't I don't think I see her. But Mrs. Debbie was actually my parents' teacher. She is? Oh, wow. I'm glad she's not in the room because she would have seen that I did not know who she was if I was I definitely commend you all for the work that you do. Although I do live in Canfield, my son is a student at Ferguson Florissant School District because I was one of those many parents that stood out in that line for hours and hours and hours at Riverview School District to unenroll him there and enroll him in Ferguson Florissant, and I did just that. So he goes to Griffith Elementary School now. That Saturday that everything happened, we were actually at a picnic, and I don't know how, but we usually would be outside around that time of the day. When we got home, of course, all the streets and stuff were blocked off. That was about 3:30. So we had to park about 6 blocks over, actually into Jennings, and walk over. And as we were walking over, the body was still laying out in the street. My son asked me, he said, "Mom, who is that?" And at the time, I did not know exactly who it was. When we found out who it was, because he was actually a close friend of my little brother's, who was 19 now. He's 19, and they went to school together, and he came up to me and he told me that was him laying in the street. Now just imagine a 6 and a 4-year-old, they're just standing there. When we got up to our street, because he was killed in 2900 block, we stay in 2948. So that lets you know how close it was. My 6 and my 4-year-old literally paused, and I'm grabbing them, trying to move them, and they're scared. They cannot move or anything. Later that night, the police came back. They beat surveillance cameras off of the buildings. My kids were scared again because they see all the police lights coming back down the street. After everything is over, the body is removed. The parents went on about their business down the street. They actually stay in the back of us where the grandmother stays at in North Winds. And I was like, well, what's going on now? And the next thing I know, they pulled dogs out. And they were sticking the dogs on children. They were macing children as well as adults. And I just didn't understand what was going on. And then that's when they told us that the surveillance cameras had been beat down from the buildings and residents were trying to stop them. And they called for a significant amount of backup, stating that the residents were trying to harm the police. Now, I haven't been outraged until now, given the fact that I was woke up out of my sleep to a burning memorial site. That's where my rage really grew. Because I figured if you don't have respect for a sacred area, what do you have respect for? This is where he laid. This is his last place where he laid. Why come back and do that? Us as residents, when he was removed off that street, we tried our hardest to get the blood up off the concrete, but we could not. We went and bought push brooms from Family Dollar, which is right around the corner. We got bleach and we were scrubbing away, but we could not get it. What are you supposed to do behind that? As residents, I mean, I know what we're looked at over there because it's a low income area. You know, it's mainly blacks over there. I understand all of that, but that does not give you the right to just come in and tear this community apart even more. You know what I'm saying? You're paid to, you're supposed to protect and serve us, not harm us, for one. That's how we look at it. That next day I called Pastor Tracy and I told her, I said, I think we need you quick. And she asked me that I know where the mother and the grandmother lived, and I told her yes, because they stayed right next door to my aunt. My whole family is over there in those complexes. And for those of you who are not familiar with that area, there's actually about 5 different apartment complexes over there in that one area. And I have family in each one of them. As well as my grandparents still stay on the other side of Ferguson. And when I say the other side, I always say that because I've always known it as 2 different Fergusons. When you cross over to the West Florissant side, no one even thinks that's Ferguson anymore. You would think it's Jennings or something of that nature, but it's not. It's Ferguson. And I always say I stay on the other half of Ferguson. And that's when people get it, like, oh, okay, you stay in Canfield. Yeah, I do. You know, so it's sad to say it like that, but that's how I was raised. And that's what I know it as. I'm trying to get that mentality out of my head so I can teach my children something different, because they've seen a lot of negativity over the past month. My son is the one that has the nightmares, though, because he's a little bit older. He's 6, so he understands a little bit more than my daughter does. He's the one that was upset because school didn't start. By the way, I was actually happy that school didn't start because I didn't want to get out in the mess. We were literally barricaded into our apartment complexes. We had to show our leases, and we still had those police officers like, oh yeah, where's that? Okay, really? It's Canfield. I know you see the Canfield title on top of the page, but they still said, oh, that's not in Canfield. That street is not Canfield. You know, so I was turned away from my home several times. I would have to actually come around the back way, which was barricaded, but I had to drive on the grass just to get home. Might have been illegal, but I still had to get home. You know, so we have that issue where I have white neighbors who stay up under me, and they were actually let in and I wasn't. You know, it's been a lot, and like I said, I haven't really got emotional until now when Pastor Tracy said all that she said, because it never hit me until now that, you know, why does it feel like I'm in the 50s instead of 2014? You know, where I come from, I seen people who look like me. I was used to it. I was never around a lot of white people growing up in Kinloch. Kinloch was one of the first African American cities in the state of Missouri, and I was born and raised there. And I look at it as if those are my people. And it's wrong. I'm not racist by any means. You know, I went to school with whites. I worked with white people. I don't have a problem with white people, and white people don't have a problem with me, but racism still does exist to this day. And I found that to be true since all of this has happened, you know, and it's really sad. I'm hoping that something good comes out of this, but I don't know about today because people are angry. And most of the people that are angry, they're young. I'm talking younger. I'm 27. Most of the guys that are out on the street right now today are way younger than me. Way younger than me. So that scares me because I know that they don't have any fear whatsoever of the police, of dying, or anything. They just do not care. At this point, they are out for blood, and I am praying that something different comes about with that. I know there's actually clergy out now. Pastor Bishop Robinson, he's out now, and there's a lot of clergy out that's on the streets. I didn't think I was going to make it here because the streets are starting to get crowded once again. When that all died down for a while, but now it's there again. You know, so my son today, he said, well, Mommy, do I have to go to school today? And I told him, yes, you have to go to school today. He said, well, when I get home from school, are we going to be able to come home? I told him I don't know, because I don't know. I got out today because I drove in grass again, but I'm hoping that we can get back home. If not, that probably wouldn't be a problem with me because I probably don't want to be there anyway, to tell you the truth. Because I really do think that, you know, this was done by outside agitators from what everyone else here was told. But from my neighbors, they actually said that it was a police officer that did it. So I don't know how true that is. I'm praying that that's not true because as a police officer, I wouldn't think that you would do something of that nature, but you just never know. So I'm praying that something good comes out of this. I'm praying that the community rebuilds and we rebuild strong and very soon. There's another town hall meeting tonight for the Ferguson residents, which I'm really scared to go to at this moment because I'm pretty sure there's going to be a lot of protesters out there, which they should be. I'm not saying they shouldn't be, but I'm just, at this point, I'm not sure of our safety at this moment. So that's where I stand as a resident in Canfield.
Okay, thank you, the three of you. Now is time to ask questions, make comments, share stories, and then we need to sort of wrap it up with where we go from here.
What we would like to do here at the National Center, well, there's a lot of things we have going on in our heads, but to keep a forum going so that it is progressive, to support your work, but to go beyond that. You know, we have our policy, cultural competency policy, we have our core values, and then we have a whole list of what we believe in. So we have to take a look at ourselves as well as we work with families of all colors with young children to see whether or not we're really doing those things. We're really supporting families, teaching parents, and loving those parents,
the way we say we believe we're to do our work. So we certainly want to get there. But before that, I just want to put that into your minds as we share stories or ask questions, because that's the long view. Because we say all children will grow and learn to realize their full potential. All children will grow and learn. That's the big vision. So what's our charge? Given today's world, what's happening here, what's our charge as parent educators, supervisors, administrators, whatever you want to call it, who believe in children, who believe in fair treatment? What's our charge? So with that, anyone want to ask a question, comment, open it up? You're all back here, so you have something to say.
I don't like microphones.
Okay, we get it.
Okay, well, I'll use it.
Okay.
Well, my question, Reverend Tracy, you made a statement regarding the little boy, the mother who said the little boy was playing in the yard and ran up on the porch when the police came by. Okay, this is really, it's kind of personal at the same time, but that little boy probably lived in that neighborhood. Do you think that there's a way, because my son, he's 7, he knows nothing about what's going on, because I choose not to. When it comes on the news in the morning, when it was coming on the news, when he would wake up with me in the morning, I'll put on Cartoon Network, you know, just to really keep him shielded, because I didn't know how to explain everything that was going on. So my question is there a way that you all think, am I wrong? That's what I want to know. Am I wrong for not explaining to him what's going on? Because you do have some other kids who do know what's going on, even because I live in the city. I live in St. Louis City, so we even have some city children who, because their parents took them out there to go protest and all of that, I decided not to, because like I say, I didn't even know how to explain this to him, because I'm still in confusion on some of the aspects of the whole situation, you know. So is there a way that we can ask, I don't know, being a parent educator, I'll start doing home visits soon and going out to homes, and if this were something that was to come up with me working with 3 to 5-year-olds, would it be okay to say, if you cannot talk about this around your child, if it were to come on the news, maybe send your child to another room, so that it's not something that's so heavy on them, these babies, to have to deal with also, and not truly understand what's going on.
Okay. Thank you for that question. I don't know that I can say whether it's wrong or right. I think that's a personal decision that every family makes. I am a child of the 60s, and I'm from Birmingham, Alabama. So many of you know what it means to be a child of the 60s from Birmingham, Alabama. I was born in '63. So people expect me to know everything about the civil rights movement. And they're wrong. I had parents who chose to do what you did. So I never experienced firsthand the segregation in the stores, or I don't remember black and white water fountains. My parents chose not to expose me to those things, and they were able to do so. And I get a lot of flack for that. There were parents who chose to do what my parents did, and there were parents who chose another route, and somehow we all made it. So it's a personal decision that each parent has to make. What I would appreciate, and certainly this is your area, not mine, what I would appreciate is perhaps sharing with parents the consequences with whatever decision they make. So if your child is continually, for the children who are growing up in Canfield, there is no choice.
Exactly.
You know, because when you drive through, I've been saying this lately, everyone wants to do something for Canfield. But as long as the attitude is do something for Canfield, we're already missing the mark. We have to be doing something for all of us, right?
Right.
Canfield doesn't need fixing. It's not a mission field.
Right.
We all have a vested interest in what happens in Canfield, whether we know it or not. So those children, imagine So I'm saying that to even talk about the protests, right? The protests for justice. Imagine if you woke up on Saturday morning and there were 1,000 people in your front yard. For a good cause. But you can't go to the grocery store. You can't turn on the Cartoon Network and your children not ask you what's going on. The little boy who dropped to his knees and raised his hand, what I said to his mother is, I don't know why he did that. I don't know whether he did that because he saw something that day. I don't know whether he did that because protesters have been coming through every day since saying, hands up, don't shoot. I don't know if he saw something on TV. I don't know. Right? So I would hope as an educator that you would have the conversation with the parents about the consequences of whatever decision that they make. And then that decision has to be theirs. Are you wrong? No, not if that's what you think you need to do for your child. Is someone wrong that takes their child? No, not if they think that's what they need to do for their child. I know that's like a preacher answer, but it's all I got.
No, well,
You go ahead. Just to piggyback off of what Pastor Tracy said, if I had a choice to make, I definitely would not let my children understand what was going on at this moment because they're too young. My son will be 7 October 9th, so I understand where you're coming from, but he's also very curious at that age. So as much as I tried to keep him out the front room, tried to keep him out the windows and things of that nature, he still got in there. You know, so
He saw a dead body in the
yeah,
street.
that too, you know, but at the same time, I kind of broke it down to them like, you know how sometimes we buy bad apples, and I talk to them just like this, like I'm talking to you. I said, you know, sometimes we buy bad apples and a bag of apples, and inside that bag of apples there are rotten ones. My son said, yeah, we just got a bag like that the other day from Schnucks. I said, that's exactly how police are, and people in general. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. That has nothing to do with us. But as mommy, I'm going to protect you as much as I can. And that's what I told him. Now, if I had a choice to shield him, I would. I would, because I feel like he's been exposed to too much in the early age. And that wasn't my fault. That wasn't anybody else's fault. But at the same time, it's too late now and I have to tell him. So I have to sit him down and tell him about certain things and try to explain to him about certain things. And when he sees police, he doesn't do the hands up, don't shoot motion, but he'll run. He'll run. So now I'm coming to that crossroad where I'm having to teach him not to run from the police.
I wanted to say one more thing about that. What I'm more interested in seeing from those of you who have the privilege of being in the position that you're in, so this is a cultural thing. In African American culture, we are not ones who go to therapy easily or anxiously or even validated. I'm just being honest. In general, that is not what we do. And what we're talking about are children who have been traumatized and who may be in need of some real therapy. For the majority, the place that they come is the church. And as a pastor, one of my mantras is that we are not therapists. I know we like to think we are, but we're not. We're not trained counselors unless you have that degree, right? And so if there was something that could be put together for your benefit, of questions you could go through with the family that would indicate that perhaps therapy is needed, or perhaps this child needs some follow-up services. Maybe you already have something like that, you know, that would call to attention for parents things that they may be missing. Is your child acting more withdrawn? Is your child's behavior something that's out of the normal for them? Are they asking questions that they don't normally ask? All of those things are indicators that therapy might be needed. And I think because you have the trust of the family and you have the child there, that's a conversation that you could have more easily than they would take it from strangers just saying, get your child some therapy. They might miss some things that you pick up. Is that fair? I don't know if it works like that, but
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
The Black Psychology Association actually did come out on the grounds for 2 weekends in a row, I believe. And it was really neat, and that's the time that I actually did take my children outside to do those activities. They made the kids make peace flags. And on the peace flags, they had to state what they wanted to see in their community. My son chose peace, love, and then at the bottom, I don't know where it came from, but he said, God loves me.
But then even that though, what I'm saying is, you know, I'm not a teacher. My hat's off to you. I would do anything but that. But what I'm saying is, sometimes those things show up later as well.
Yeah.
So they were there the first 2 weeks,
Yeah.
but you all are there throughout the whole school year. So maybe they were a straight A student and now they're a C student, or however that works. I would just encourage you to keep mindful, even when the media goes on to the next thing, that these children may still be experiencing that. And as first responders, you might pick up on that.
I have a question over here. Right, so as you're talking, my brain is just going everywhere, and I just want to touch on a lot of things. I think I totally agree, is the relationship. And I think that's what we have in Ferguson with our families. We are in the streets, we are in the homes. And I think, you know, even though we just see the prenatal to 5-year-olds, it's so often that the parents talk about their older children and what's going on with them. And so they see and they really do respect what we have to say. And you know, like I've been in Canfield, you know, and I'm right there in Parkway, which they've got it fenced in now. I don't know. I don't feel as safe anymore going in there now that it's all fenced in.
Parkridge.
And Parkridge, sorry. You know, and I've talked to the families, and they've said the same thing. So, and we talked at one of our staff meetings, and we listed some things, and I just need to type it all up, to what can we do to support the parents that we serve, and then some that we're not serving, to outreach, to have, like you said, those days that, you know, we used to go in to Parkridge Apartments and just have activities, and the families would come out, and the kids would just have a ball just playing, and it was a happy time. I mean, we need to do more of that, but boy, it's hard. It's hard. So maybe we do need to go into more of those churches to do that, where the families feel safer to go. I don't know, but I feel like what can we do to, as you know, in the homes, to bring out those families, to help those children to still have those happy times, to connect, you know.
I think that you started by owning it. I'm in Canfield a lot now, and it's not what the TV makes it look like. So what you have at the height of the unrest, what was happening on West Florissant, you'd be surprised to know that a lot of Canfield residents weren't involved in that. So when you got into Canfield, I'm not saying, you know, of course you have to use common sense. And of course, everyone is concerned for their safety no matter where they are. But when you got into Canfield, what I found, contrary to what the media made it look like, were just families trying to raise their kids. You had senior citizens, you have veterans, you have lots of young children, families trying to create some normalcy. And so if you have that kind of relationship with your families, this is me, okay? I'm saying you certainly are welcome to use even my church. But what does it say about where they live? I would rather see you just be honest and say, I have some fears about being in the neighborhood. And have that conversation. And if you can't get over those fears, and be honest about that. But don't assume, not today would be a really bad day to go to Canfield, okay? But that's because of the memorial. But before that happened, it wouldn't be any different than you've seen before.
No, and I want to, that's not where I was going.
Okay, I misunderstood.
Yeah, please.
You've been back in there, we've all seen that it is.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
She was talking about the difference between the apartment complex put a fence for security around the complex, and we can only get in one way or another.
Yes.
And through one way, that's been a recent change. And we have seen crime actually seems to be going up with residents, is that fence is not helping. And that's been a big change. This is their part.
Yeah, I know about that.
Can I jump in there real quick too? Because I thought I also heard you ask what you can do
Right, and that's where
to
my
help-
point was. What, because we're
to
going
help,
into
not
these
just the
apartment
conditions there, but to
complexes.
help the families
Right.
that you are in
Right.
contact with.
To go on and feel normal, to have those kids, to still have a fun time. You know, we need to be out there more.
Well, I would say two things. The first thing I would say is, don't change what you've already been doing, because as I said at the top of my remarks, you've already been doing a pretty good job. I think you all have a pretty good idea about how to prepare kids for an education and how to build relationships in homes. But as a parent in the district who has received the services of parents as teachers, I would also say to you to make the difficult choice that I offered up at the top of my remarks too, and become advocates for those families out in the communities. Make sure, because generally speaking, most parents that I know can handle what's going on in the house. It's like she said, when her sons leave the home, what are they walking out into? Become advocates for meaningful change in the community we all live in. Vocal advocates, active advocates for meaningful change in the community we all live in. They need a voice where it's going to be heard, because a lot of times those families' voices are ignored and discounted, whereas people in this room voices may not be. So when we collect ourselves for what's right and what we all understand as human beings to be moral and ethically sound, I think that would go a long way towards building the kind of relationships that you would like to have with those families when they see you advocating for them. That goes a long way towards strengthening the relationship that already exists.
And being very careful around the, just paying attention. So one of the things that didn't get put on the news was that when the protesters, or some people in the protest group, when that group turned to violence, not the whole group, but the looting and all of that happened, and the militarization of the police, the buses stopped running because they were afraid. So when the buses stopped running, then the people who were in the neighborhood who relied on public transportation to get to work couldn't get to work because there were no buses running. When they couldn't get to work, then they lost their jobs. And when they lost their jobs, then they can't pay their rent. And so now they're behind on some other things. Then you can't feed your children, then you can't do those kinds of things, right? And so paying attention to the domino effect from this also is helpful to the families. And advocating, like Reddick said, in whatever ways you can around that. That's a very real issue that we're dealing with right now.
I am very conscious of the time, and I know that Mr. Reddick will have to leave us in a few minutes. But we have a charge before us, I think it will be important for all of us, and we may have more than Ferguson Florissant School District represented, do we? Okay, so we have other school districts around Ferguson Florissant that's been impacted by this, and so we're all in this together. So we have some action, some things that we need to do in order to advocate for our families and what that means. And I said a little earlier that we want to continue this in some fashion, bringing you together in some fashion to look at what that means. The National Center has a goal of getting something going that creates an environment, a community environment for parents where it feels and probably will be safe for the parent and the young children. That's the future conversations we want to have with you. So has this been helpful today, I must ask? Has this been helpful? Would you like to continue having such a thing and not necessarily have the panelists back here, but to really look at some concrete ways to be advocates? We know that you have your work that you do in the home, and then you have the social connection, the group connections. I mean, do we look at using more of the group connections format for a while so that we can, you know, have families to know that we're still interested, we want to be advocates for them, and we want to keep the young children involved. We want them engaged. So that's something else that we can think about and talk about. We have Joy here, you know, we have Joy here, we may have other supervisors, Hazelwood, Carrie, hi there, here. So you have your leaders here. So stay tuned to what's next, and we need to hear from you. Email messages, you know, you can call us up, give us your thoughts about what you think we need to do as an organization, what would be helpful in your school districts, and what would be helpful to the 4 or 5 school districts that were impacted by this.
And you have churches.
Well, absolutely churches.
So I'm just saying it's an opportunity for us to work together.
Right.
If there are some things that we can provide, whether that be space or whether there be supplies that we can have supply drives, I'm just thinking off the top of my head. There are ways that we can work together. You don't have to be in it by yourself. We can't do what you do, but we certainly can support in ways that maybe we haven't thought about before.
And so I'm going to ask, yes, Joy.
I just wanted to ask that the communities really speak to the school districts and say what you want and what you need. Because sometimes when we speak up within the system, about what we think is important, it's not as valued as if parents will step forward. Case in point, Ferguson has really come with some heavy budget cuts. We lost all the transportation for our preschool children. So if you can't get your own child to preschool, we can't pick you up anymore. We can't pick your child up at the child care center and bring him to preschool and take him back the way we could for many years. We lost 5 preschool classes. We are strong believers in early childhood education. But we haven't had any parents really speak up. We've had parents or community leaders speak up and say, wait a minute, this is hurting the people who need it the most. But they're very worried, and should be, about accreditation and putting money to elementary and secondary schools. But you know, the future is with the youngest children. And so we could work together if you would make your voice heard and say, hey, wait a minute, don't cut any more parent educators, don't cut any more preschool classes, give us back what we used to have and get the neediest children a way to get to preschool.
I received that, and I think some of that is happening, but I'd be interested in doing more.
Me too.
What that means is that you would have to educate us. I'm just being honest.
And I don't have any young kids anymore, but I'm a firm believer. My mom was an early childhood educator, and I know how critical it is, so I would love to.
Well, I do, and I know multiple families who do. And over in Campfield, our children can't go to preschool. So they're basically just stuck at home with us, which is not a problem with me. She's mine, yeah, I do. I have a 4-year-old. She's not able to go to kindergarten until next year because of her late birthday. But we were told that she can't go to Head Start and preschool in the Ferguson Florissant School District because they only do K through 12 to get unenrolled out of Riverview. Exactly, get the transfer. So it's like I'm kind of stuck at a crossroads, and that's how many families are over there.
Well,
so is it the
Riverview
children
has a good early childhood program too, and you know, if your child had a way to get to that program, I think one of the really serious needs in our, well, even more than just the North County area, is that little children can't get to preschool. It's more expensive. You have to buy special buses. You have to have seat belts, but the chairs, car seats, and blah, blah, blah. I get excited. I get tongue-tied. I'm sorry.
Is there something, is it the Children's Defense Fund? What, there's,
Trust
this children what?
fund.
So there's one in the county and there's one in the city?
Oh, no.
Thank you.
Okay.
Children's Services Fund. In the county, it's structured differently than in the city. Am I telling that story correctly? I'm learning all of this. So in the city, it's an independent thing by itself, and they can use the money for whatever they want to use it for. In the county, it's been restricted mostly to behavioral services.
Mental health.
So there is a movement afoot now by community leaders and pastors to push for the restructuring of that to be independent like the city. And I think that there are some contingencies being made in that regard even now before we can get it changed with the changing of the county executive, getting it changed. Because my church just signed off to be a partner in some of that, to use some of that money to fund some undergirding services. So there may be a way, I'm just saying that, I don't know, there may be a way to use some of that money for transportation. And if we knew to advocate for that, if somebody wrote it up for us, this is the time. Because everybody wants to do something.
Right.
So, you know.
It's expensive. I mean, I acknowledge it's expensive. They
Well,
save
it's
a
not
lot
more
of money,
expensive than
but-
children failing school.
And I think it's important that our parents and citizens understand the structures and the control behind these dollars. It's not as easy as it may seem that we just apply for this money. We know that here at the National Center.
Okay.
But this is the day where we really talk about how do we help parents, how do we help citizens, how do we help communities rise up so that their voices are truly heard. And that is not a easy thing to do, but this is a right time for it. Because when Joy was saying, tell us, come out, where's your voice? We know where the voices are and where they have been, because they have not been, I'm using the old terminology, empowered. So what happens? You turn your back, you become silent about this. And now we don't need this. We need parents like Sierra and others. I'm still a parent, you're a parent for a lifetime, had to do the very same thing for my child years ago and other children like him years ago. So now we're at a time where people are pushed aside, become others. So Reverend Tracy, what do we do? And that's not a question for the day, but it's a question for the future. What do we do so that we don't have the other? And it's all of us. Parents as teachers is about parent engagement, right? Parent engagement, parent involvement, parent leadership. That's what we say a lot, at least around here, that's what we say. So no longer is it just a term that we throw around, it's a term that we really look at, community by community, district by district, early childhood program by early childhood program. And so these three leaders, all three leaders are here to share with you, so you can take something back, but bring something back to us here at the National Center. So together we can plan. This organization is just entering into a new strategic planning process. You all know what that is. This is the right time to roll some of this thinking and happenings into strategic planning and visioning for this organization with our board. What it means for what we do with you and young children and families. Other questions of thought. I'm going to charge Ann Young, our Missouri manager, going forward to be the one to engage with you, in the future around questions, action steps, coming back together, so we don't lose this momentum, that we keep this going for the future of our families, our children, North County, everywhere. I mean, this is a national thing, but international too. Internationally, we're looking at Ferguson as well. All right, I was going to say amen. Amen.
Is it possible for whoever said Riverview had a good preschool, can you connect with her?
They're all here.
Thank you.
They are all here.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Take some chocolate with you.